So I just finished reading Shikasta by Doris Lessing, book one in the Canopus in Argos Archives series. Full title is Recolonized Planet 5 Shikasta Personal, Psychological, Historical Documents Relating to the Visit by Johor, um, Emissary, Grade 9, 87th of the Period of the Last Days. So, this was honestly really frustrating. Um, I so like the premise, which I found really intriguing, intriguing enough that I may end up reading the subsequent books in this series because I think they focus more on the premise. Um, the premise is that Earth was actually set up as a colony by this intergalactic civilization called Canopus. Um, that basically what they do is they plant the seeds of life on a planet, kind of help it develop in a certain direction, and then once it reaches a certain point, they welcome it into the fold of their civilization. Really cool idea. Um, and then there's these other intergalactic civilizations, one of which Sirius is like kind of their rival, but it's much weaker than them, and it's not like a super hostile rivalry, and they even allow Sirius to conduct experiments on planets that are colonized by Canopus. They're amicable, and then they have another civilization called Shamat that's like their great enemy. So all of that sounds really interesting, and then the first half of this book is the history of how Canopus colonized Earth. And it's written by a Canopian emissary named Johor, and he's like it's like an epistolary novel, so it's like his journal entries and his reports back to Canopus about what's going on Earth. Um, and the name of Earth, originally when they colonized it, the name of Earth was Rohanda. And then at some point after Earth started getting influenced by this evil civilization, Shamat, the name of the planet was changed to Shikasta. Um, but obviously the people who live here call it Earth. But yeah, so that's the title of the book, Shikasta. So the first half of the book is really interesting, and it's also like almost kind of a retelling of ancient history, and also the Old Testament of the Bible is in there. Really interesting. And then about halfway through, it turns into this like family saga about these people who are living in the near future in sort of a dystopian Earth where the influence of Shamat upon Shikasta has gotten to the point where everything's just kind of awful. And it's an epistolary family saga about this group of siblings and their parents and the paths that they find through the dying days of Earth, basically before the whole thing gets wiped out by war. And that second half I found really boring. And it's also just not what this book seemed to advertise itself as for the first like 100 or so pages, maybe more than that. Again, I think it was around halfway that it turned into, yeah, like, well, I guess, yeah, maybe less than halfway. I was only like a third of the way in, so it was like 100 something pages when it turns into this narrative that I just really didn't find interesting. But I pushed through because the sci-fi part of the premise is really fun, and I want to be able to read the other books in the series. And from the synopses, they seem to stick closer to that like soft sci-fi epic type of thing. And it's but I mean, the synopsis of this book doesn't suggest any of what it turns into either. So I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but they are much shorter. There's four more. I happen to have them here, and they're all a lot shorter. Most of them are less than 200 pages. I think this one might be just over 200. The rest are like 150, if that. So like, even if I end up having issues with them, they're quick. I'll probably end up reading at least one more beyond this first one. But yeah, I don't know. Just I'm really frustrated with the way that the book changes genre almost. I'm frustrated with how boring it becomes. And it's like, Doris Lessing, she won a Nobel Prize. She's obviously a very talented writer. And there were moments in this book where I understood why she has those accolades. But then there are other moments where the prose was really unremarkable to me. Yeah, it was just really inconsistent, this book. Um, yeah, and it's like so the family that we're following, the Sherban family, they they have a grandparent who was from India, but the rest of their family are like British aristocrats. So they came from India when it was a British colony, and then they end up living in some British colonies in Africa in around the middle of the 20th century. Um, and then the siblings as they grow up kind of spread out across the world. And I think so. Doris Lessing, she was the child of a British diplomat. And when she was born, her father was stationed in Iran, I believe. So she was born in Iran, actually. But shortly after, like very early in her childhood, her father got transferred to Rhodesia. So she spent most of her childhood and a little bit of her young adulthood living in Rhodesia. She became like an anti-racist activist in Rhodesia. If you're not familiar with Rhodesia, very similar to like apartheid South Africa. Um, very similar. And she grew up there, but she, despite being part of the class of people that would benefit from that system, she recognized that it was unjust and became a political activist against it, which is very admirable. And then I think in like her mid 20s, she moved to the UK and spent the rest of her life there, but continued to be involved in like left-wing political causes. So all of that's very cool, and I think a lot of her writing deals with that stuff. It's like kind of semi-autobiographical. She's got books about characters who were involved in left-wing organizing. She's got books that are about like racism in colonial Africa. So I almost kind of feel like I'm very interested in reading that stuff, but it almost kind of feels like she sat down to write this sci-fi novel, writes like half of a really cool soft sci-fi, like philosophical sci-fi epic, and then kind of reverts back to the stuff that she would usually write about. But it's the book kind of fails to be a good version of either of those things, and I wish she had fully committed to writing a sci-fi book, and I'm hoping that that's what the rest of the series is because there's some cool ideas in this book. It's just she doesn't spend enough time on any of them, in my opinion. Um, I mean the main idea of this book that I do find kind of intriguing, but I don't I did not find the way it was presented to be particularly engaging, but it's an intriguing idea is that um everything bad about like human nature comes from the influence of this evil alien civilization, Shamat. Um, which is just I mean that's like just kind of a MacGuffin or whatever. Like, oh, everything bad about humanity is just because of these evil aliens influencing us, and we need to somehow get back to the influence of the good aliens in Canopus. Like, that's not particularly compelling, but she uses that as just a starting point to critique everything that she finds problematic about human nature and human civilization. Which, like, okay, fair enough, and that's an interesting idea and I'm open to her exploring that more in the subsequent books. But it's just, I just really, really hated the family saga half of this book. It's so boring, and I could not bring myself to care about these characters. I like if you're gonna do this big philosophical sci-fi epic and talk about all the problems of humanity, then like do that as like just a broad grand sweeping thing as you did in the first half of the book. We don't Yeah, I don't know. This was a frustrating experience. I think I mentioned this book in um the video I made a couple videos ago about all the books I was going to take with me on vacation and I was like, "Oh, this one might come on vacation or I might finish it before the trip." What ended up happening was I got so mad at this book that I didn't finish it, but I also didn't bring it with me. I've been back from my vacation for a few days now, and I finally got around to finishing this. And yeah, this was rough, but I got through it. I might read the rest of the books because there's some cool ideas in here that I do kind of want to see explored further, but we'll see. Um, yeah, I've got another book that I'm gonna finish in the next few days, The Pastor by Hannah Erstavik. That was one I started on my vacation. I'm about to finish that as well, so I'll be back with a review of that soon, and hopefully it's looking like I'm gonna like it a lot more than I liked this.